In the summer of 1929, a 41-year-old stockbroker sat down for a shoeshine on Wall Street. The boy polishing his shoes was 11 years old, wearing a gray wool cap and leather suspenders, his hands calloused and stained with polish. As the boy worked, he started talking. He named companies by ticker symbol. He predicted which stocks would rise next week. The stockbroker listened. He paid, he tipped generously, and he walked back to his office. Within the hour, the stockbroker called his broker and began selling, systematically. Small lots first, then larger. Over the following weeks, he exited nearly every stock position he held. By early autumn, he was holding almost entirely cash. Wall Street considered this the worst possible position a man could be in. 2 months later, on October 29th, the market collapsed. 85% of all market value was erased over the next 3 years. 10,000 banks closed. $140 billion in depositor money vanished. The stockbroker's fortune did not shrink. It multiplied. He went from $4 million in 1929 to $180 million by 1935. In today's purchasing power, roughly $4.2 billion. His name was Joseph Patrick Kennedy, son of an Irish saloon keeper from East Boston, future first chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, father of the 35th President of the United States. The moves Kennedy made during those 6 years are the pattern the wealthy have used before every major collapse of the last 100 years. Weimar, 1923, the Great Depression. Japan, 1990. .com, 2008, every single one. The pattern is identical, and the 3 signals Kennedy watched for in 1929 are all flashing again in 2026. This is silent capital before it collapses. History has the answers. We just show you where to look. To understand the shoeshine moment, you first need to understand what made Kennedy different. He was not the richest man on Wall Street. He was not the most credentialed. He was an outsider. Born in East Boston in 1888, son of a ward boss and saloon keeper, Irish Catholic in a Protestant city, he graduated Harvard in 1912. By age 25, he was president of Columbia Trust Bank, claiming accurately to be the youngest bank president in America. During World War I, Kennedy managed the Four River Shipyard for Bethlehem Steel. It was there he met Franklin Delano Roosevelt, then Assistant Secretary of the Navy. That connection would quietly define the next 30 years of Kennedy's career. In 1919, Kennedy joined Hayden Stone and Company on Wall Street. He became an expert in tactics that were then legal, but would later be outlawed as criminal manipulation, stock pools, wash trading, insider information. On September 16, 1920, Kennedy was standing on the corner of Wall and Broad Streets when a horse-drawn wagon loaded with 100 pounds of dynamite detonated outside the J.P. Morgan building. 38 people died. Hundreds were wounded. The blast threw Kennedy to the ground. He walked away physically unharmed. But the 32-year-old Irish banker left Wall Street that afternoon changed. He stopped trusting institutions to warn him of danger. 9 years later, that instinct would make him wealthier than God. Between 1921 and September 1929, the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose from 63 to 381, a 500% gain in 8 years. American wages during the same period grew less than 30%, and everyone rose. Suddenly, average workers were in the stock market. Taxi drivers discussed margin with passengers. Waitresses pooled tips for railroad shares. Barbers gave stock tips while cutting hair. And shoeshine boys memorized ticker symbols. People were borrowing money from brokers to buy more stock. The standard margin was 10%. You could own $10,000 of stock with just $1,000 down. Margin debt reached record levels every month of 1929. Then, in September, the most respected economist in America, Yale professor Irving Fisher, announced that stock prices had reached what looked like a permanently high plateau. He said those exact words. 3 weeks before the most catastrophic market collapse in the history of industrial civilization. The traditional story is that Kennedy sat down at a Shoeshine Stand outside 120 Broadway. The boy started talking about stocks. He named companies. He predicted which would rise next week. He spoke with the confidence of a man 3 times his age. Kennedy listened, because Kennedy was not listening to what the boy was saying. He was listening to who was saying it. An 11-year-old with no education was confidently giving stock advice to a professional broker. That single observation told Kennedy the market had reached the last stage of every speculative bubble in history. When the wrong people are in the market is at its end. On Tuesday, October 29th, the collapse came. $16 billion in market value was wiped out in a single session. In today's money, roughly $300 billion. The Dow fell from 381 in September to 145 by November, a 60% loss in 7 weeks. It kept falling through all of 1930, 1931, and most of 1932. By July of 1932, the Dow bottomed at 41, an 89% decline from peak. Joseph Kennedy was holding cash. The Great Depression was not a recession. It was the collapse of the American financial system. 10,000 banks closed permanently. $140 billion in depositor savings evaporated forever. Real money belonging to real families. Money that took decades to save. Gone in months. Unemployment reached 25%. 1 in 4 working-age Americans had no job. Every major city had its Hooverville. Every small town had its breadline. A generation of American children grew up with a specific relationship to money that still shaped their behavior 50 years later. Before we get to what Kennedy did with that cash over the next 6 years, one quick note: the 3 signals Kennedy read, the 4 historical collapses they match, and the specific modern parallel you can track right now, I compiled all of it into a single complete framework. 50 pages, 7 strategies, verified against primary sources. The Silent Capital Playbook, $14.90. Link in the description. Now, stay with me, because the next part is where most people get it wrong. The 99% of Americans destroyed in the crash shared one thing. They were fully invested. Every dollar in stocks, or in banks, invested in stocks. For 8 years, every voice of authority had told them the same thing you hear today: cash is an underperforming asset. Inflation erodes it. The opportunity cost is too high. In a rising market, that argument is mathematically correct. It fails catastrophically at the exact moments that matter. The fully invested had no capital to deploy when assets became cheap. They rode the wave down and waited decades for recovery. Here is the move that separated Kennedy from every other man with cash in late 1929. He did not deploy it. Not in November, not in 1930, not in 1931, not for the first 3 years after the crash. He waited. Most people who sell at the top get that first move right. Then they get bored. They watch stocks bounce back briefly. They redeploy into what looks like the bottom. They get destroyed by the second and third waves down. Kennedy's genius was not the selling, it was the waiting. Kennedy waited until the market reached genuine forced selling, when banks were liquidating foreclosed properties to raise reserves, when estates dissolved at any price to pay taxes. Only then did he buy, through a company he created called Old Colony Realty Associates. Its mission was acquiring distressed real estate across America at prices that would never return. Manhattan brownstones at 60 cents on the dollar. Commercial buildings in Boston. Development land in New York. Coastal property in Florida. The same properties priced as speculation in 1929 were priced as tragedy in 1933. Kennedy bought the tragedy. In March 1933, Kennedy made another move that reveals the pattern completely. Prohibition was about to end. Franklin Roosevelt had just been sworn in as president. Kennedy partnered with James Roosevelt II, the president's own son, Together, they formed Somerset Importers. Before Prohibition was officially over, Kennedy sailed to Britain. He secured exclusive American import rights to Hague and Hague Scotch, Gordon's Dry Gin, Dewar Scotch. Then he filled enormous warehouses in New Jersey with product. When the 21st Amendment was ratified on December 5th, Kennedy and his partner were literally the only legal source of high-end imported liquor in the United States. Every bar, every hotel, every upscale restaurant in America needed their product. They could set prices freely. They made millions in the first 90 days. Kennedy used the cash flow from Somerset to fund further real estate acquisitions. He was not speculating. He was waiting for forced sellers, recognizing structural opportunities, and deploying capital into assets that produced income regardless of what the currency did. Own the real. Be short the paper. This is the pattern. 3 moves in the correct order. Exit the speculative asset at the top while everyone else is euphoric and calling you an idiot. Wait through the declines. Wait through the false bottoms. Wait until forced sellers appear at genuinely forced prices. Deploy the cash into real assets at prices that will never return. These 3 moves work because of human psychology, not market mechanics. Exit fails because humans fear missing out. Wait fails because humans get bored. Deploy fails because humans panic exactly when they should be buying. 6 years before Kennedy's shoeshine moment, in Germany, a man named Hugo Stinnes had executed a different version of the same principle. Stinnes was the wealthiest industrialist in pre-war Germany. When Germany lost World War I and faced massive reparations, the Reichsbank began printing marks to pay the debt. The currency collapsed. By November 1923, a single United States dollar was worth 4.21 trillion German marks. Middle-class savings were erased overnight. Pensioners watched lifetimes of work become wallpaper. Literally, it was cheaper to paper walls with marks than to buy actual wallpaper. Stinnes did the opposite of every instinct a German citizen had. While everyone else tried desperately to hold cash to preserve purchasing power, Stinnes borrowed marks aggressively, enormous sums. He used those borrowed marks to buy hard, productive assets: coal mines, steel mills, merchant shipping, newspapers, hotels, manufacturing plants, anything producing real goods for real people. When the mark collapsed, his debts collapsed with it. Zero purchasing power meant zero debt. His hard assets retained real value because they produced real things. Stinnes emerged from the inflation as the richest man in Germany. 2 men, 2 continents, 2 catastrophes, separated by 6 years and 4,000 miles. Stinnes exploited currency collapse. Kennedy exploited asset price collapse. The tactics were different. The underlying principle was identical. Own the real. Be short the paper. Understand that during a crisis, currency is the most dangerous asset to hold, and hard assets that produce income are the safest. The people who learn this become wealthier every crisis. The people who never learn it become poorer every single time. One more layer to this story most people do not know. In July 1934, President Roosevelt appointed Joseph Kennedy as the first chairman of the newly created Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC had been founded specifically to outlaw the exact tactics that caused the 1929 bubble: insider trading, stock pools, wash trading, market manipulation. The exact tactics Kennedy had mastered in the 1920s. When journalists asked Roosevelt why, he reportedly answered with one sentence: "Set a thief to catch a thief." Kennedy accepted the position and took it seriously. Under his leadership, the SEC introduced mandatory corporate financial disclosures. It cracked down on insider trading. It established the regulatory framework that still governs American financial markets 90 years later. Every rule he wrote was designed to make it impossible for someone like him to make money the way he had. The man who profited most from the absence of rules became the architect of the rules themselves. When Kennedy resigned 15 months later, no one questioned his performance. 11 years after leaving the SEC, in 1945, Kennedy made his most famous real estate acquisition, the Chicago Merchandise Mart. At the time, the largest privately owned building in the world, 4 million square feet, an entire zip code. He paid approximately $13 million. His descendants sold it in 1998 to Vornado Realty Trust for $625 million, 48 times his investment over 53 years. That single building funded 3 generations of Kennedy political careers, including the presidential campaign of John Kennedy in 1960. Kennedy left behind a specific method, 3 signals he watched for in the summer of 1929 before exiting. All 3 are visible today in 2026. Signal 1 is inexperienced participants entering the market in unprecedented numbers. In 1929, taxi drivers and shoeshine boys giving stock advice. Today, retail trading apps with 40 million users. 16-year-olds on TikTok explaining cryptocurrency. People who cannot define a blockchain borrowing money to buy it. When the wrong people are confident in the market is at its end. Signal 2 is credit conditions becoming unusually loose. In 1929, 10% stock margin. Today, record consumer debt levels, buy now, pay later schemes at every checkout. Auto loan terms stretch to 84 months, longer than most cars last. Credit card approval standards, looser than any time since 2007. Students carrying debt equal to a starter home. The specific mechanism varies by era. The underlying pattern does not. When credit becomes easier to get than basic goods, the system is stretched beyond its capacity to absorb shocks. Signal 3 is official authorities insisting rising prices represent a new and permanent reality. This is the most important signal because it sounds like reassurance. Irving Fisher in September 1929, Ben Bernanke in 2007 calling subprime contained, Alan Greenspan warning about irrational exuberance, then spending 5 years telling people the warning no longer applied. Every major collapse has been preceded by the most credentialed voices publicly announcing the old rules no longer apply. This time is always different, and this time never is. The Kennedy strategy, translated to 2026, is 3 moves in the correct order. Move 1. Audit your current exposure honestly. Pretend you are reviewing a stranger's portfolio and ask whether this portfolio is positioned for what is coming. Move 2. Build a strategic cash position equal to 12 to 24 months of household expenses, held outside the speculative financial system. Not a small emergency fund, a strategic reserve. Move 3. When the distressed moment arrives, deploy that cash into real assets at prices that will not return. If this is the kind of history most financial channels will never tell you, hit the like button so the algorithm shows this video to the next person who needs to see it. The 99% destroyed in 1929 were not stupid. They were trusting the wrong voices at the wrong moment. And in the comments, tell me honestly, are you fully invested at historic valuations right now, or are you already quietly building your cash position? No judgment. I read every comment. The most important truth nobody in financial media will tell you is this: the 1% does not predict the collapse. They cannot predict it better than you can. The exact month, the exact trigger, the exact depth, all are genuinely unknowable. What the 1% does differently is prepare. They position themselves in advance. They accept slightly underperforming during the good times in exchange for dramatically outperforming during the crises. When the crisis finally arrives, they are already positioned to act, while everyone else is forced to react. Preparation beats prediction every single time. Kennedy did not know October 29th would be the exact date of the crash. He did not know the Dow would bottom at 41. He did not know Prohibition would end in December 1933. He did not know Roosevelt would win in 1932. He simply knew the signals were lit. He knew an 11-year-old shoeshine boy giving stock tips meant the music was about to stop. He exited in the summer. He held cash for 3 years. He deployed into real assets during the bottom. 50 years later, his son was President of the United States. The Silent Capital Playbook is the complete framework written out in full. 7 strategies the elite have used before every historical collapse. The gold anchor, the hard debt paradox, the cash position Secret Kennedy used in 1929, counter-cycle real estate, the principle that built the merchandise Mart fortune, crisis-proof skills, the jurisdictional hedge, the early warning system, 50 pages, 1 hour to read, $14.90, link in the description. 4 optional companion playbooks at checkout for deeper tactical execution. The question for you, watching this in 2026, is simple. When you take a rideshare, what does the driver talk about? When you get a haircut, what does the barber mention? When you scroll through social media, what are 16-year-olds confident about? When you eat dinner with family who have never shown interest in markets, what are they suddenly asking you? Kennedy understood the signal when a shoeshine boy spoke. The signal has not changed. The price for ignoring it is always the same. You ride the wave down and wait decades for recovery. If everyone you meet is talking about stocks, cryptocurrency, or real estate, the market is telling you something specific. Kennedy heard it from a shoeshine boy in 1929. What are you hearing in 2026? If this made sense to you, subscribe to Silent Capital. New videos every week. Next week, we cover Hugo Stinnes and exactly how he became the richest man in Germany using borrowed money during hyperinflation. History has the answers. We just show you where to look. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing in this video constitutes financial, investment, legal, or tax advice. Always consult a licensed professional before making financial decisions. Historical examples are not predictions of future results. Portions of this video were produced with AI assistance for research synthesis and editorial organization. All factual claims have been verified against primary academic and institutional sources listed in the description. Silent Capital, before it collapses.